The Archons are real. I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it because if you've been on a spiritual path for any amount of time, truly on it, not just reading about crystals on a Sunday afternoon, you already know something has been working against you. You felt it, that invisible resistance, that moment where you were so close to a breakthrough and something pulled you back. That loop you keep living where you do the work, you raise your vibration, you get clear, and then something hits you and you're back at the bottom wondering what happened. That's not your fault. That's not karma. That's not the universe testing you. That's interference. And Mary Magdalene, one of the most suppressed, most misrepresented, and most powerful spiritual teachers in all of recorded history, she knew exactly what that interference was. She knew its name. She knew its mechanism. And she knew the one physical anchor that could make you untouchable to it. Not metaphorically untouchable, energetically untouchable. This video is about that anchor. It is about one specific metal that Mary Magdalene named, a metal that, when worn correctly around the neck, with full understanding of why, creates a field around your body that the Archons simply cannot penetrate. Not because it fights them, because it makes you speak a frequency they have no language for. Now before we go any further, I need to be clear about something. This is not beginner content. If you're brand new to spiritual concepts, if you've never heard the word Archon before today, some of what I'm going to say is going to sound strange. And that's okay. But this video was made for the people who are already awake enough to feel what I'm describing. The ones who've been doing the inner work. The ones who know that the material world is not the whole story. The ones who've had experiences they couldn't explain and couldn't forget. This is for you. And I want you to understand something right from the start. What Mary Magdalene preserved, what survived through the mystery traditions, through the initiates who refused to let it die, was not a religion. It was not a set of beliefs you adopt. It was a technology, a living, practical, wearable technology for the human energy field. Most people who talk about Mary Magdalene focus on her story, her relationship to the Christ, her role in the early community, the controversy around her identity. And all of that is interesting, but none of it is what matters most to you right now. What matters most is what she knew, because she didn't just witness. She understood. She understood the architecture of the soul. She understood the forces that move against awakened consciousness. And she understood that the physical world, the world of matter, of earth, of things you can hold in your hand, was not separate from the spiritual world. It was a reflection of it, and certain materials in the physical world carry a frequency so specific, so aligned with a particular level of consciousness, that wearing them becomes a form of spiritual declaration. I'll say that again because it's important. Wearing them becomes a form of spiritual declaration. You are not just putting on a piece of metal. You are broadcasting a signal. You are tuning your instrument to a specific frequency. And when that frequency is high enough, when it matches the right resonance, the Archons don't attack you, they don't fight you, they don't even register you. You become invisible to them. Not because you're hiding, because you're vibrating at a level they have no access to. That is what this video is about. And I want you to stay with me for every single second of it, because what I'm going to share with you builds. Each piece connects to the next. And by the time we get to the reveal, by the time I name the metal and explain exactly why Mary Magdalene chose it, you're going to understand it not just in your mind, but in your body. You're going to feel why it's true. So let's begin. Let's begin with her. Let me tell you who Mary Magdalene actually was. And I don't mean the version that was handed down through centuries of deliberate distortion. I mean the woman as she existed in reality, as she was known to those who walked with her, learned from her, carried her teachings forward at great personal risk. She was not a penitent sinner. She was not a footnote. She was not a supporting character in someone else's story. She was the foremost initiate. In the early mystical communities that formed around the teachings of the Christ, there was a clear understanding, even among those who wrote about it cautiously in code, in symbol, that Mary Magdalene possessed a level of inner knowing that was unmatched. Not just emotional devotion, not just faithful presence, actual gnosis, direct, unmediated, living knowledge of the nature of reality, the structure of consciousness, and the forces that move against awakening. The early Christian mystic Hippolytus of Rome, a theologian of the 2nd century who grappled seriously with the mystical dimensions of early Christianity, referred to Mary Magdalene using a title that should stop you in your tracks. He called her, and I want you to hear this, the apostle to the apostles. Not an apostle, the apostle to the apostles, meaning she was the one who carried the resurrection knowledge to the others. She was the primary transmission point, the one through whom the highest teaching moved. And yet somehow, over centuries, she was reduced. Deliberately, systematically reduced. I'll come back to why that happened and who benefited from it. But right now I want you to hold this image, a woman who stood at the center of a living mystery tradition. Not at the edge, at the center. A woman who understood, truly understood, the relationship between the human soul, the material world, and the invisible forces that operate between them. In the world of mystery traditions, there is always a hierarchy of knowledge. There are outer teachings, things that are shared broadly, that form the foundation. And there are inner teachings, things that are transmitted only when a student is ready to receive them without distorting them. Mary Magdalene operated at the level of inner teaching. She was not reciting doctrine. She was transmitting living knowledge. There is a profound difference between those two things, and most people never encounter the second one. What makes her relevant to this conversation, to Archons, to protection, to the specific metal we're building toward, is this: she understood the enemy. Not as a theological abstraction, not as a metaphor for human weakness, but as an actual operating principle in the structure of reality. She understood that awakening consciousness attracts interference. She understood that the interference has a mechanism, and she understood that the mechanism can be countered. Now here's where my personal view comes in, and I feel strongly about this. The reason Mary Magdalene's specific teachings about spiritual protection have been so thoroughly buried is not an accident of history. It is not just that she was a woman in a patriarchal era, though that is part of it. The deeper reason is that what she knew was genuinely liberating in a way that threatened systems of control. When people understand how to protect their own energy field, when they understand that they don't need an institution to mediate their spiritual safety, they become significantly harder to manipulate. They become harder to keep in fear. And fear is the primary operating currency of control systems, both visible and invisible. So they buried her teachings. They reduced her to a symbol. They kept the outer story and destroyed the inner map. But maps have a way of surviving. Fragments stay alive in traditions, in mystery schools, in the practices of initiates who understood what they were carrying. And one of the most important fragments, one of the most practical, most direct, most immediately applicable pieces of her inner teaching is about a specific metal. A metal with a specific relationship to the body's energy field. A metal that, when placed at the throat, creates a condition of frequency coherence that archonic interference simply cannot break through. We are building toward that metal. And before I name it, I need to make sure you understand what the Archons actually are, because without that understanding, the protection won't make complete sense. You need to know what you're protecting against before you can understand how the protection works. So let's talk about the Archons. You may already know the word Archon. You may have encountered it in your studies. But I want to go deeper than the surface definition, because most of what circulates about Archons online is either too vague to be useful or too dramatic to be accurate. And neither of those serves you. The word Archon comes from ancient Greek. It means ruler, administrator, governor. And that is precisely what they are, not monsters, not demons in the Hollywood sense, but administrators of limitation. Forces that maintain a particular structure of reality, a structure in which consciousness remains bounded, forgetful, and controllable. The teachers who first mapped archonic reality, and I'm talking about the deep traditions, the ones that predate organized religion, that flow through the mystery schools of Egypt, through the Chaldean star wisdom, through the Neoplatonists. They described the Archons not as evil in a moral sense, but as functional in a limiting sense. They exist to maintain boundaries. The problem is that those boundaries were never meant to be permanent. They were meant to be the shell of the egg, necessary for gestation, but not meant to last forever. At some point, the bird has to break through. The Archons resist that breaking through. That is their function. And when a human being begins to awaken, truly awaken, not just intellectually but energetically, at the level of the soul, they attract archonic attention. Because awaking consciousness is a boundary being crossed, and the administrators of limitation respond. Now here is where I need to correct something that almost every piece of content about Archons gets wrong. People talk about Archons as if the primary threat is psychic attack, as if they're coming at you with some kind of supernatural force. And so people respond by building shields, by doing protection rituals, by visualizing white light barriers and calling in armies of angels and making themselves into fortresses. And I understand why people do that. When you feel something working against you, the instinct is to build walls. But Mary Magdalene's tradition understood something more sophisticated than wall building. The Archons' primary weapon is not force. It is frequency interference. They do not attack you like a battering ram. They insert noise into your signal. They work at the level of your etheric field, the subtle energetic body that exists just at the boundary between your physical form and your soul. And they introduce static, repetitive thought loops that feel like your own thinking, but aren't. Emotional states that seem to arise from your life circumstances, but are actually being amplified from outside. A persistent, low-level hum of unworthiness, of not enoughness, of fear that can't quite be located and therefore can't quite be addressed. Does any of that sound familiar? I thought it might, because here's the crucial insight from the Magdalene tradition. The Archons cannot create. This is one of the most important things to understand about them. They have no original creative power. Everything they do is a distortion of something real. They take your genuine longing for love and distort it into desperate attachment. They take your genuine awareness of your own power and distort it into arrogance or collapse. They take your genuine spiritual sensitivity and distort it into anxiety, paranoia, and overwhelm. They are the great distorters, the master counterfeiters. And because they work through distortion rather than direct force, most protection strategies don't work on them. You cannot shield against something that is already inside your signal. You cannot fight something that doesn't confront you directly. You cannot ward off something that doesn't come from outside, but from within the gap in your own coherence. This is why the teaching is not, fight them. The teaching is, become coherent. Become so fully, clearly, uninterruptedly yourself, at a frequency so clean, so resonant, so aligned, that there is no gap, no static, no opening, nothing to distort, because everything is already whole. And the Archons, because they can only work in the gap, only in the distortion, only in the interference space, find nothing to grab. You don't become protected, you become unreadable. And to something that operates through distortion, an unreadable signal is the same as no signal at all. You become, quite literally, invisible to them. Now, the question becomes, how does a physical material, a metal you wear around your neck, contribute to that coherence? How does something outside your body affect your energetic field enough to make this kind of difference? For that answer, we have to go into the world of metals, into the ancient understanding of what metals actually are, what they carry, and why the initiates of every great tradition chose specific metals for specific spiritual purposes. And this is where the story gets extraordinary. Picture this. It is Alexandria, Egypt, somewhere around the 2nd century. The city is the most extraordinary intellectual and spiritual crossroads the ancient world has ever produced. In its libraries and private sanctuaries, traditions from Egypt, from Persia, from Greece, from the mystery schools of the East, they are all colliding, cross-pollinating, producing knowledge that the world will not rediscover for another 2,000 years. In one of those sanctuaries, a group of initiates are gathered. They are not academics. They are practitioners, people who have tested these ideas against lived reality, against the body, against the subtle senses that open up when the mind becomes still enough to notice them. And they are working with metals, 7 metals specifically, each one assigned to one of the 7 classical planets. Each one understood not just as a physical substance, but as a material expression of a particular cosmic principle, a frequency made solid, a level of consciousness given form. They know that the body is not just flesh. It is a receiver. It is an extraordinarily sensitive, extraordinarily complex antenna for subtle energies. And they know that what touches the skin, what is held in direct contact with the body's surface, is not neutral. It communicates with the body's field. It either disrupts, amplifies, or harmonizes the signal the body is already generating. This is not mystical thinking that has no basis in reality. Modern biophysics has begun to confirm what these initiates knew by direct experience. The human body generates measurable electromagnetic fields. The heart alone generates a field that extends several feet beyond the physical body. The skin is not a wall between you and the world. It is an interface. A living, responsive, electrically conductive interface. What touches it matters. The 7 classical metals of esoteric tradition are gold, silver, copper, iron, mercury, tin, and lead. And each one of them corresponds to a planet, a principle, and a level of human experience. Gold corresponds to the sun, sovereignty, illumination, the radiant self. Silver corresponds to the moon, intuition, receptivity, the reflective mind. Iron corresponds to Mars, will force the power to act. Mercury, the metal, corresponds to the planet Mercury, communication, speed, the nervous system's intelligence. Tin corresponds to Jupiter, expansion, wisdom, abundance. Lead corresponds to Saturn, structure, time, the weight of material existence. And then there is copper. Copper corresponds to Venus. And Venus, in the ancient cosmology, in the mystery school tradition, in the living energetic map of human consciousness, Venus is love. Not romantic love as we sentimentalize it, but love as a cosmic force. Love as the fundamental connective principle of reality. Love as the frequency that dissolves separation, that bridges above and below, that makes the soul visible to itself. The initiates in that Alexandrian sanctuary would have known immediately what copper was for. It was not for warming the blood, not for grounding fear, not for building power. Copper was the metal of the heart's intelligence, the metal of the connective force, the metal that, when placed against the body, creates a resonance with the Venusian frequency, with the principle of love as a living, active, protective force. Now here is what is critical to understand. In the mystery school tradition that Mary Magdalene carried, the tradition that understood the divine feminine not as passive, but as fiercely, actively intelligent, the Venusian frequency was not considered soft. It was not considered vulnerable. It was considered the most powerful protective force available to the human being. Because the Archons, those administrators of limitation, those frequency distorters, operate entirely through fear, through separation, through the feeling of not enough. That is their entire toolkit. And love, genuine, coherent, Venusian love frequency, is a field they have absolutely no access to. It is not that love fights fear. It is that love exists in a dimension that fear cannot enter. They are not opposites on the same scale. They are different scales entirely. So when an initiate in this tradition wanted to protect their field from archonic interference, they did not reach for iron, the warrior metal. They did not reach for gold, the solar sovereign metal. They reached for copper. Because copper, placed against the skin, placed specifically at the throat, the bridge between heart and mind, the seed of the living word, creates a coherence field resonating at the exact frequency the Archons cannot replicate, cannot distort, and cannot penetrate. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I said I would name the metal at a specific moment. And that moment is now. Copper. That is the metal. Not gold. Not silver. Not the precious metals that history has taught you to associate with spiritual power and sacred objects. Copper. The reddish, warm, ancient metal that has been used by human civilization for over 10,000 years, longer than any other metal in recorded history. The metal that is, in fact, one of the most electrically conductive substances on Earth. The metal that carries a signal better than almost anything else in the physical world. And I want you to sit with that for a moment before we go further, because your first reaction might be, copper? That's ordinary. That's pennies and pipes and electrical wiring. And that reaction, that dismissal, is exactly what the hidden tradition predicted. The most powerful things are always hidden in plain sight, always dressed in the ordinary, so that only those with eyes to see will stop and look twice. Copper is extraordinary. And once I tell you what the esoteric tradition actually says about it, what Mary Magdalene's teaching preserved about this metal, you are never going to look at it the same way again. Let's start with the physical reality, because the physical and the spiritual are not separate in this tradition. They are mirrors of each other. The physical properties of copper are themselves a teaching. Copper is the best natural conductor of electricity among the common metals. What does that mean in the language of the body and the energy field? It means copper moves energy. It does not store it like a battery, does not block it like a barrier. It conducts it. It keeps it moving, flowing, circulating. In the language of the body's subtle anatomy, stagnant energy is where interference takes root, where the archonic patterns find purchase, where the loops begin. Moving, flowing, circulating energy, that is a healthy field. That is a coherent field. And copper, pressed against the skin, actively promotes that flow. Now let's go to the esoteric layer. In the ancient planetary correspondence system, copper is Venus. But what does Venus actually mean at the deep level? Not just love in the abstract. In the precise language of the mystery tradition, Venus represents the principle of harmonic attraction, the force that draws things into right relationship with each other. Not merger, not dissolution, but right relationship. The appropriate distance and connection between things. The principle that creates beauty, coherence, resonance, harmony. Think about what the opposite of that is. The archonic principle. Separation, distortion, interference, dissonance. The forcing of things out of their right relationship. Copper, as the material expression of Venus, carries the frequency of harmonic attraction. It is the physical world's anchor point for the principle of right relationship. When you wear copper against your skin, you are not just wearing a metal. You are creating a constant, living, physical contact with the Venusian principle. You are allowing that frequency to literally flow through your body's electrical system, to circulate in your field, to hold the coherence that archonic patterns require the absence of in order to take hold. And Mary Magdalene understood this with a precision that was, in my view, simply breathtaking. Here's what makes her choice of copper so specifically, so unmistakably right for what she was teaching. Mary Magdalene was not just a wisdom teacher in the general sense. She was a teacher of the divine feminine intelligence. And the divine feminine intelligence, in its deepest, most authentic form, is not about softness or passivity or nurturing in the conventional sense. It is about the fierce, clear, unconditional intelligence of love. Love that sees completely. Love that does not flinch. Love that holds its frequency in the face of everything that tries to distort it. That is a Venusian quality. That is a copper quality. In the tradition she carried, the highest protection was not a shield. It was a state. It was the state of being so completely, so coherently present in the frequency of love intelligence, not sentiment, but actual frequency, that everything that operates below that frequency simply has no grip. The Archons don't reach you not because they bounced off a wall, but because they arrive at the frequency of your field and find nothing there they can work with. They are operators of fear, of separation, of dissonance. And your field, anchored by the Venusian resonance of copper, is continuously, actively harmonizing itself toward its own wholeness. They can't touch that. They genuinely cannot. Now, one more layer here, and this one is deeply important. Copper does something gold and silver do not do in the same way. Copper interacts with the human body biologically. The body actually uses copper. It is an essential trace element in human biology. The liver stores it. The nervous system uses it. It participates in the production of energy at the cellular level. This means copper is not foreign to the body's system. It is already in conversation with it. When you place copper against the skin, you are not introducing an alien frequency. You are amplifying something the body already knows. You are turning up the volume on a signal the body is already trying to broadcast. The body knows copper, and copper knows the body. This is not true of gold in the same biological way. Gold is energetically powerful, yes. But copper is both energetically powerful and biologically native. It works on both levels simultaneously, the subtle and the physical at once. That dual action, that ability to bridge, is itself a deeply Venusian quality. Venus is always the bridge, always the connector between levels. And where do we place it? Around the neck, at the throat. Why there specifically? Why not the wrist, the finger, the chest, the heart itself? That answer requires its own full teaching. And it is one of the most profound things I am going to share with you today. The throat is not just an anatomical location. In every major esoteric tradition on Earth, without exception, the throat is recognized as one of the most significant energy centers in the human body. In the Hindu and yogic system, it is the Vishuddha chakra, the center of purification and authentic expression. In the Hermetic tradition, it corresponds to the realm of the word, the logos, the creative power of sound and spoken intention. In the Kabbalistic tradition, it sits within the framework of the tree of life as the seed of truth, of the divine voice made human. Across all of these systems, the throat carries the same fundamental meaning. It is the place where the inner world becomes outer reality. It is the bridge between what you know in your soul and what you express in the world. Between what lives inside you as pure consciousness and what gets materialized through sound, through language, through the spoken word. And in the teaching that Mary Magdalene preserved and transmitted, the spoken word was not merely communication. It was creation. This is something the mystery traditions took with absolute seriousness, and something our modern culture has almost completely lost. When you speak, when you form intention into sound and project it into the world, you are not just making noise. You are performing an act of creation. You are exercising the same faculty that, at the cosmological level, brought the universe into being. In the beginning was the Word. That is not poetry. That is a precise metaphysical statement about the nature of creative power. The word logos is how consciousness becomes form. It is the bridge between the invisible and the visible. and the throat is where that bridge lives in the human body. Now do you understand why copper at the throat is so specifically, so surgically, so exactly right? Because copper, as the conductor, as the Venusian harmonizer, as the metal that keeps energy moving in its right relationship, placed directly at the throat, directly at the bridge between inner and outer, directly at the seat of the creative word, does something extraordinary. It tunes the instrument. It keeps the channel clear. It ensures that what moves through the throat, every word you speak, every intention you voice, every sound you project into the world, carries the highest, clearest, most coherent version of the signal that lives within you. And it does more than that. In the Magdalene tradition, there was a specific understanding about what happens when the word is distorted. When fear frequency moves through the throat, when you speak from a place of contraction, of unworthiness, of archonic interference, and you don't even realize it's interference, you think it's your own thought, your own voice, you are actually creating dissonance in the field around you. You are, with your own voice, broadcasting the static that the Archons inserted into your system. You become an unwilling amplifier of the very frequency that diminishes you. Copper at the throat interrupts that cycle. It does not silence you. It does not control what you say. What it does, at the level of the subtle body, is continuously work to harmonize the frequency that moves through that center, to keep the channel attuned to Venusian resonance, to love intelligence, to coherence, so that when you speak, even when you speak about hard things, even when you speak about pain or challenge or resistance, the base frequency, the carrying wave of your voice, is harmonized, is clear, is whole. The Archons insert their distortions through the gap between your soul's knowing and your throat's expression. They fill that gap with doubt, with fear, with the sense that your word doesn't matter, that you shouldn't speak, that your voice is not worthy of being heard. And when you silence yourself, when you suppress the word that lives in you, you create exactly the kind of stagnant, dammed-up energy that interference thrives in. Copper at the throat keeps the channel open, keeps the word flowing, keeps the expression moving, keeps the bridge active. And here is the connection that makes this teaching feel like it was designed by someone who understood the human condition with terrifying precision. Mary Magdalene herself was silenced. Her voice was suppressed. Her word was taken away by systems that needed her quiet. And yet the teaching she left behind is about keeping your word free, about wearing the metal that ensures your expression remains rooted in love intelligence and not in the fear frequency that systems of control have always used to keep people small. She knew what it meant to be silenced, and she gave us the tool to prevent it. I find that almost unbearably beautiful. But now we need to get even more specific about the mechanics. Because understanding that copper harmonizes the throat is one thing. Understanding exactly how the Archons interact with the human energy field, and exactly why copper interrupts that interaction, is what turns this from an interesting teaching into something you can actually use. Let me give you the real mechanics. Because this is where the teaching becomes a tool. And tools only work when you understand how they work. The human being is not just a physical body. You already know this. You are a layered system, physical, etheric, emotional, mental, and beyond. The physical body is the densest layer, the most visible, the most measurable. But the etheric body, the layer of subtle energy that exists just at the edge of the physical, that interpenetrates every cell and extends a few inches beyond your skin, that is where the real action happens. That is the interface layer, the place where the invisible world and the visible world are in constant, dynamic communication. Think of the etheric body as the body's operating system. Not the hardware, not the software applications, but the underlying system that runs everything. The foundation on which your thoughts, your emotions, your perceptions, your experiences are all built. The Archons work at the etheric level. Not at the physical level. They have no direct access to your physical body. Not at the soul level, they cannot reach that high. The etheric body is their operating zone. And what they do there is introduce what I would describe as coherence disruption. They create small fractures, moments of discontinuity in the smooth, unified field of your etheric body. Small gaps, small places of dissonance. And through those gaps, they insert patterns. Not thoughts exactly, not quite emotions, something more like templates. Preformed emotional mental shapes that, once inserted, begin to generate their own content from within your own energy system. Like a virus that uses the host's own cellular machinery to replicate itself. The Archons insert a template of fear, of unworthiness, of separation, and your own system, not recognizing it as foreign because it arrived through the gap before your awareness could catch it, begins to generate thoughts and feelings that conform to the template. You think it is your thinking. It feels like you're feeling, but it's running on someone else's code. This is why spiritual work can be so maddeningly circular. You can understand intellectually that you are worthy. You can meditate. You can do the inner work. You can have genuine breakthroughs. And then the loop starts again. Because the loop is not operating at the level of your understanding or your intention. It is operating at the etheric level, in the gaps, in the places where your field is not quite coherent. Now here's the critical question. What creates coherence in the etheric field? Love does. Not sentiment, not positive thinking, not affirmation. Actual love frequency. The genuine, Venusian, cosmically sourced principle of harmonic attraction. The force that draws all things into right relationship with themselves and with each other. When love frequency is running through your field, when it is genuinely present as an active energy, and not just as a thought about love, the etheric body becomes coherent. The gaps close, not because something is filling them from outside, but because the field itself organizes into wholeness. And copper, physically, electrically, subtly, is the conductor of that frequency. Place it against your skin, and you are creating a continuous, living, uninterrupted circuit between your body's biological electrical system and the Venusian resonance that closes the gaps the Archons need to operate. Here is the piece I find most telling. The Archon's frequency signature is, at its core, the frequency of separation, of disconnection, of the sense that you are alone, that you are not enough, that there is no help coming, that love is conditional, that safety is impossible. That is the template they work with because it is the most effective one. Beings that operate on separation frequency are most threatened by, most disrupted by, the frequency of connection, of unity, of love that is not conditional on anything. Copper literally cannot hold a separation frequency. Its entire nature, physically, energetically, mythologically, is connective. It bridges circuits. It completes them. When you have copper at the throat, at the body's bridge point, conducting through your skin, circulating through your field, you are running a frequency through your system that is the direct antidote to everything the Archons can insert. Not because it fights them. Let me say that one more time because it is so important. Not because it fights them. Because it makes your field speak a language they do not have access to. You become, to archonic frequency, quite simply untranslatable. Now here's what I want you to really absorb. The people who attract the most archonic interference are not the spiritually weak. They are the spiritually strong. The awake ones. The sensitive ones. The ones who are genuinely moving towards something real, something transformative, something that, if it fully manifests, would change not just their life but the field around them. If you have always felt that your spiritual path brings more chaos than other people's, that you work harder and still face more resistance, that you're doing everything right and still something keeps pulling at you, I want you to consider that this is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of your actual brightness. The Archons do not bother with people who are not a threat. They concentrate their interference where consciousness is actually waking up. You are feeling interference because you are moving, because you are light, because something in you is becoming genuinely free, and the administrators of limitation do not like that. And this is exactly what Mary Magdalene understood, and why she preserved this teaching. Not for everyone, for the ones who needed it most, for the chosen ones who feel the weight of it. Which brings me to the practice, because knowing all of this is only the beginning. The question is, what do you actually do with it? Let me be direct about something before we go into this. What I am about to share is not about buying an expensive piece of jewelry. It is not about aesthetics or fashion or what looks good with your outfit. It is about a practice, a daily, conscious, intentional practice that transforms an ordinary object into a living extension of your energy field. This distinction matters enormously, because copper worn unconsciously, worn as decoration, worn without awareness of what it is and what it does, is just copper. It is a beautiful metal with interesting physical properties, and that is all. The frequency potential is there, yes. But potential without activation is dormant. What activates it is you. In the tradition that preserved Mary Magdalene's teaching, there were 3 conditions that had to be met for copper to function as genuine spiritual protection. I want to walk you through each one carefully, because each one builds on the others. The first condition is purity. The copper must be as pure as possible. Not mixed heavily with other metals, not coated in synthetic materials that break the contact with the skin. The purer the copper, the cleaner the conductivity, the clearer the frequency. When copper is alloyed, mixed with other metals, it takes on the frequency character of those other metals as well, which muddies the signal. For this practice, you want copper that is as close to its natural state as possible. This does not mean it has to be laboratory pure. Naturally high-grade copper, traditional copper artisanship, these carry the right quality. What you want to avoid is something that is mostly another metal with copper plating. That is not copper in the sense that matters here. The metal that is doing the conducting, the metal that is actually in conversation with your skin and your field, that needs to be primarily, substantially, genuinely copper. The second condition is skin contact. The copper must touch your skin directly, not over a shirt, not through a layer of fabric. Skin contact is not a preference in this tradition, it is the mechanism. Remember what we said about the body being a receiver, about the skin being a living interface. The communication between copper's frequency and your body's electrical system happens at the skin. Remove that contact and you break the circuit. The pendant can be beautiful, the chain can be meaningful, but if there is fabric between the copper and your skin, you have lost the essential connection. This is the neck, the throat, specifically because that is where the teaching says the anchoring should happen. A pendant on a chain that rests against the skin of the throat. That is the placement. Long enough to rest at or just below the throat center, short enough that it is not reaching toward the heart center. That specific zone, the base of the throat, the junction between voice and chest, that is where the Magdalene tradition places the anchor. The third condition, and this is the one that almost no one talks about, is activation. Before you wear a piece of copper for the first time, and also at regular intervals as you continue to wear it, it needs to be activated. Not in a complicated ritual sense. Not with incense and altars and elaborate ceremonies, though those can be beautiful if that is your practice. But at the absolute minimum, with breath, with intention, and with the spoken word. Here is what the tradition preserves about this practice. Hold the copper piece in your hands. Your palms both in contact with it. Feel the weight of it. Feel the warmth that immediately begins to build between your hands and the metal. Because copper conducts heat as readily as it conducts electricity, and that warmth is itself part of the dialogue beginning between you and the metal. Breathe onto it, not casually, intentionally. A slow, deliberate breath, directed onto the surface of the copper. In the tradition, the breath is the carrier wave of the soul. Your breath carries your unique frequency signature, the specific resonance that is you and only you, into the physical world. When you breathe onto the copper, you are not just warming it, you are coating it. You are giving it your frequency so that it can amplify that specific frequency rather than running a generic signal. And then you speak to it, out loud, with your actual voice, your actual throat, the bridge we have been discussing. Give the copper its function. Tell it what it is for. This does not have to be elaborate. It does not have to be in Latin or in any sacred language. It can be simple and direct. Something like, this metal is an anchor for my field. This metal carries the frequency of love intelligence. This metal holds my signal clear. What moves through me moves in coherence. The words matter less than the genuine intention behind them. What matters is that you are using your voice, that logos, that creative bridge, to assign the metal its function in your field. You are not performing a magic spell. You're doing something more interesting than that. You are using the principle of the word, the creative principle that the throat embodies, to consciously integrate a physical object into your energy system. You are completing the circuit between intention and matter. After activation, put it on. Feel it settle against your throat. And for a few moments, simply be aware of it. Not anxiously, not analytically, just aware. Present to the contact. Present to the warmth. Present to what it is and what you have just established it to be. This is the practice. Wear it consistently. Wear it consciously. When you notice yourself in a fear loop, in an energy drain, in a moment of archonic pattern recognition, bring your awareness briefly to the copper at your throat. Not to fight anything, not to invoke a shield. Just to reconnect. To return to the frequency it is holding for you. To remember what you are. In my own view, this activation practice is the most neglected piece of the entire teaching. People buy spiritual objects constantly, crystals, metals, amulets, talismans, and wear them as decorations. And then they wonder why nothing changes. The object is not a passive charm that works by existing near you. It is an active participant in your energy field, but only after you have consciously, deliberately made it one. The activation is the moment you make it real. Without the activation, copper is just copper. With it, copper is a living extension of the most powerful protective frequency available to the human soul. And what does it feel like when it is working? What actually changes? I want to be careful here. I am not going to make promises or tell you that putting on a piece of copper is going to solve your life. That is not what this is. And anyone who tells you a single object will fix everything is selling you something, and it is not wisdom. What I will tell you is what the tradition observes, what the esoteric record shows, what the energetic logic, when followed honestly, leads you to expect. And then you can measure it against your own experience. The first thing that shifts is the quality of your mental signal. The thought loops that the Archons run through your system, those repetitive, circular, fear-based patterns that feel like your own thinking, but have a quality of foreignness to them, a quality of heaviness that doesn't belong to your natural state, those become noticeably quieter. Not immediately, not the first day necessarily, but over time and with consistent conscious wear. They don't disappear entirely. The work of discernment, of distinguishing your genuine thoughts from inserted patterns, is ongoing inner work that no metal can replace. But the volume decreases. The grip loosens. There is a bit more space between the pattern arising and you identifying with it. And in that space, that little bit of breathing room, your own awareness can step in. The second shift is in your intuition's clarity. One of the most destructive things archonic interference does is create noise in the intuitive channel. You know the feeling, when you can't tell if what you're sensing is genuine guidance or fear. When the voice of your own knowing gets muddied with anxiety to the point where you don't trust yourself anymore. That confusion is not accidental. Confused people are much easier to manipulate than clear ones. As the copper works and your field becomes more coherent, the intuitive signal gets cleaner. Not louder necessarily. Clarity does not always mean volume. But cleaner, more distinct. More like a clear tone rather than static. You begin to trust it more, not because you've decided to trust it intellectually, but because it has become genuinely more distinguishable from the noise. The third shift, and this one tends to surprise people the most, is in your relationships. Archonic patterns, because they run on separation frequency, on the sense of not enough, on fear-based bonding, tend to attract and sustain relationships that mirror those frequencies. People who feed on your energy, who loop you into their patterns, who benefit from your confusion and your self-doubt. These relationships do not survive a coherent field. Not because you push people away, not because you become hard or closed, but because the frequency you are now broadcasting is not compatible with what was previously latching onto you. Relationships based on genuine love, on mutual respect, on actual resonance, those strengthen. Those feel easier. Those become more nourishing. But the ones that were feeding on your archonically distorted signal, those begin to fall away. Sometimes gracefully, sometimes not. But they fall away because the meal is no longer being served. I find this one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole teaching. The protection is not aggressive. It is not violent. It does not push. It simply becomes coherent. And things that are not coherent with that field naturally, organically, without drama release. And there is one more shift, the most personal one, the hardest to describe, but perhaps the most profound. You start to remember who you are. Not in a dramatic, mystical experience way. Quietly. In small moments. A morning when you wake up and the first feeling is not dread but aliveness. A moment in a difficult conversation when you notice yourself staying in your own frequency instead of being pulled into someone else's chaos. A moment of creative flow that feels like you have finally stepped back into your own signal after a long time of broadcasting someone else's static. That is the lived experience of archonic patterns losing their grip. That is what it feels like when the interference decreases and your own genuine signal begins to come through with more clarity and more force. That is what copper at the throat, worn with conscious intention and genuine understanding of what it is and what it does, can contribute to. Not all of it. This is one practice, one tool, one anchor point. But it is a real one, a genuinely powerful one, and one that has been deliberately kept from you by systems that needed you not to have it. Which brings me to the question we have to ask directly. Who hid this and why? The suppression of Mary Magdalene's teaching was not an accident of history. I want to say that plainly and without drama, because sometimes the plainest statement carries the most weight. It was deliberate. Over the first several centuries of the Common Era, as Christianity was being formalized and institutionalized, as it was being transformed from a living mystery tradition into a managed religious system, there was a sustained, systematic, remarkably thorough effort to eliminate specific categories of teaching. Not the outer teachings, not the accessible ones, not the ones that could be shaped into doctrine and used to build institutional power. The outer teachings survived. They were useful. They kept people oriented toward the sacred, while remaining dependent on an institution to interpret and mediate that sacred. What was eliminated was the inner teaching, the knowledge of direct experience, the practical technologies of spiritual autonomy, the approaches that allowed an individual to work with their own energy field, their own consciousness, their own relationship to the divine without any intermediary, without any institution standing between the person and their own awakening. That knowledge was dangerous to a system being built on mediated access to the sacred. If people could protect their own fields, tune their own frequencies, develop their own direct knowing, what did they need the institution for? Not much. And so the inner teaching was quietly, efficiently, systematically removed. And Mary Magdalene was the primary carrier of that inner teaching. Not the only carrier, there were others, scattered through what would come to be called the Gnostic traditions, preserved in mystery schools that went underground, passed through initiate lineages that kept the flame alive even when it was illegal to do so. But she was the primary one, the foremost one, the one whose connection to the source of the teaching was most direct and most unimpeachable. So what did the system do? It reduced her. First by omission, simply not speaking about her, not elevating her role, not including her in the canon of primary authority. Then by reassignment, allowing the persistent, demonstrably false conflation of Mary Magdalene with a nameless sinful woman in Luke's Gospel, a conflation that Pope Gregory I formalized in a homily in 591 CE, turning the apostle to the apostles into a repentant prostitute, a woman who had to be saved rather than a woman who knew things. Think about the precision of that reduction. It didn't erase her entirely. That would have been too obvious, and her presence in the resurrection account was too central to remove. But it reframed her completely. It turned the deepest knowing woman in the tradition into someone who needed saving. It turned the teacher into the penitent. It turned gnosis into gratitude for mercy. And it worked. For over 1,000 years, that false image dominated. The inner teaching about her actual knowledge, about energy, about the subtle body, about metals and frequency and spiritual protection, went underground. It survived in fragments, in coded texts, in the practices of communities who were persecuted for keeping it. Now here is the piece that I find most important for our current moment. The suppression of the inner teaching was itself an archonic operation, not metaphorically. The same principle that the Archons use in the individual energy field. Insert patterns of unworthiness, distort the signal, create confusion about what is true, was deployed at the collective level. A whole tradition was gaslit. A whole lineage of direct knowing was replaced with a managed system that required dependence and produced confusion. And the specific teaching that was buried most thoroughly was this one, the teaching about physical anchors for the energy field, about copper, about Venus frequency, about making the body's field coherent enough that the Archons have nothing to work with. Because this teaching, if widely known and practiced, would significantly reduce the effectiveness of the fear-based control systems that benefit from people remaining frequency vulnerable. A population that knows how to close the etheric gaps, that knows how to keep their fields coherent, that knows they can anchor love intelligence physically, wearably, daily, without anyone's permission. That population is significantly harder to keep in the kind of spiritual confusion that makes mass manipulation possible. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a logical analysis of what information was suppressed, what purpose that suppression served, and who benefited from it. The answer to who benefited is any system, religious, political, cultural, that depends on keeping people spiritually dependent, frequency confused, and unaware of their own inherent protection capacity. In my opinion, the erasure of Mary Magdalene's teaching about copper and the energy field is one of the most consequential losses in the entire history of human spiritual knowledge. Not because it is the only such loss, it is far from the only one, but because it was so direct, so practical, so immediately actionable. It was not an abstract philosophical teaching. It was a technology, and that technology has been sitting unavailable to the people who needed it most for nearly 2,000 years. Until now, until the fragments reconnect, until the tradition reassembles itself, as it always does eventually, because truth is not destroyable. It can be buried. It can be suppressed. It can be silenced for centuries. But it always comes back. And it is coming back now. In this moment. For you. I need to address something directly, because the phrase chosen ones carries a lot of weight and a lot of distortion. Most of the ways it gets used in spiritual content are either glamorizing or alienating. Either it makes you feel special in a way that separates you from everyone else, or it makes you feel excluded in a way that leaves you wondering if you qualify. Neither of those is what Mary Magdalene's tradition meant by it. In the inner teaching that she preserved and transmitted, the chosen ones were not a predestined elite. They were not born marked, not cosmically selected before their time, not specially privileged in any way that others were not. The chosen ones were those who chose. That is the entire definition. Those who turned their awareness inward, deliberately, consistently, in the face of everything that tried to keep them asleep, and kept going. Who refused to stop asking, who felt the interference and kept moving, who had every reason to accept the numbed, managed, surface-level version of reality they were offered and chose not to. The choosing is the choosing. It is not what you were born with. It is what you do with what you are. And in the Magdalene tradition, the chosen ones were specifically those who had awakened enough to feel the interference. Because here is the thing that most people miss. You cannot feel archonic pressure if you are not generating a signal strong enough for it to interfere with. The interference itself is the confirmation. The resistance itself is the evidence. The fact that your spiritual path has been harder than you think it should be, that the work seems to attract its own opposition, that you feel something pushing back, that is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is the sign that you are doing it right. The Archons do not concentrate their attention on people who are safely asleep. They concentrate on people who are waking up, because those are the people whose emergence actually changes something. A fully awakened human being, one whose field is coherent, whose frequency is high, whose consciousness is genuinely, sustainably free, is not just personally liberated. Their field radiates. It affects the people around them. It changes the energetic atmosphere of every space they inhabit. It contributes to a collective frequency shift that makes the archonic operating environment progressively less habitable. That is what they are trying to prevent. Not your personal happiness. You're radiating contagious freedom. So when I talk about the chosen ones wearing copper at the throat, this is not about creating a spiritual elite. It is about arming the people who are already in the fight. The ones who already know, at some level, what they are dealing with. The ones who have been feeling the interference and working through it and need one more practical, physical, daily anchor to stabilize their field. If you are still watching this video, if you have been with me through everything I have shared, I want you to consider something. You did not find this content by accident. The pattern of your seeking brought you here. The specific frequency of your curiosity, your courage, your willingness to go deeper than the surface, that frequency aligned you with this teaching. And the fact that you are here, that these words are landing for you, that they are resonating at a level you can feel, that is itself a confirmation. You are a chosen one in the only sense that matters. You are choosing. And copper, worn at your throat, activated with your breath and your word, held against your skin with understanding and intention, is one of the most direct physical expressions of that choice available to you. It says daily, wordlessly, continuously, I know what I am. I know what is trying to interfere with what I am. And I am not available. Not today. Not any day. I am not available to be dimmed. But I want to give you the deepest layer now. Because everything we have talked about, the archons, the protection, the mechanics, the practice, all of it rests on a foundation that is more beautiful and more profound than all of it. And it is the piece that Mary Magdalene herself, I believe, considered the most important. Here is the deepest thing. In the esoteric tradition that Mary Magdalene carried, the tradition that understood the human being not as a creature trying to earn its way back to the divine, but as a fragment of the divine temporarily housed in matter, there was a teaching about what the human soul actually is at its most fundamental level. The soul is a spark, a fragment of original creative consciousness, not a metaphor, a genuine, actual, literal fragment of the same intelligence that brought reality into being. You are not separate from the source of life. You're a local expression of it, a specific, irreplaceable, irreducible expression of it, clothed in a body, immersed in matter, moving through time and space. But at the root level, at the center of what you are made of the same substance as the cosmos itself. This is what the mystery traditions called the divine spark. And it was the most closely guarded knowledge of the inner teaching, because it was the most destabilizing to systems of control, that is, not to individuals. An individual who genuinely knows they carry the divine spark does not need an intermediary between themselves and the sacred. Does not need a priest, a dogma, a managed system of salvation. They need only to remember what they already are. And the Archons' deepest operation, their most profound and far-reaching interference, is not the fear loops, not the energy drain, not the intrusive patterns. Those are symptoms. The root operation is the production of forgetting, the maintenance of the experience of separation from the divine, the constant, low-level, pervasive impression that you are small, that you are alone, that you are far from anything holy, that whatever you are looking for is somewhere else and cannot be found here, in you now. That impression, that felt sense of spiritual distance and smallness, is the primary archonic product. And it is extraordinarily effective because it works from within the very consciousness it is targeting. It hijacks your own self-perception. It makes you look at yourself through a lens of deficiency. Now, Venus, copper. In the deepest layer of the mystery tradition that Mary Magdalene inhabited and transmitted, Venus was not just the planet of love in the sentimental sense. Venus was the guardian of the divine spark, the one who held the memory of what the soul actually is during its journey through the material world. The celestial principle that, when contacted, when genuinely felt, when genuinely run through the energy field as an active frequency, bypasses the archonic interference entirely and directly reaccesses the knowledge of origin. The knowing that you came from something whole, that you are something whole, that the distance from the divine is an illusion being maintained by forces that benefit from your forgetting, not a reality about what you actually are. This is why copper is not just a protective material in this tradition. It is a remembering material. When you wear copper at your throat, when it is activated, when it is in conversation with your field, when the Venusian resonance is running through your body's electrical system, you are not just closing gaps in your etheric field. You are maintaining a continuous, living, physical contact with the frequency of your own origin, with the knowledge of what you are, with the experience, not the concept, the actual felt experience, that you are a divine spark housed in matter and nothing that has been interfering with your remembering of that has any ultimate reality. The Archons cannot touch the divine spark. This is the secret. This is the deep secret. They can surround it with noise. They can cover it with layers of forgetting. They can make you feel as if it is not there. But they cannot reach it, cannot diminish it, cannot alter it in any way. The spark is beyond their operating range. Their entire existence depends on you not knowing that. Copper at the throat is a physical, daily, tangible reminder that the spark exists, that it is in you, that it has never been in danger, that you have never been as far from the divine as the interference has been trying to make you feel. You don't wear copper to get protected from outside. You wear it to remember the protection you already are. Let me say that one more time because this is the heart of the whole teaching. You don't wear copper to get protection from outside. You wear it to remember the protection you already are. The divine spark is incorruptible. The Archons cannot create it, cannot destroy it, cannot touch it. All they can do is make you forget it. And copper, warm, red-golden copper, Venus metal, conductor of connection, material expression of the cosmic love intelligence that holds all things in right relationship, placed at the bridge of your body, at the seat of your word, against the living warmth of your skin, whispers to you, every moment of every day, in a language below thought. You came from something whole. You are something whole. You have never been separated. You have only been made to forget. And I believe, in the most complete way I know how to believe something, that this is what Mary Magdalene wanted every chosen one to know. Not as a concept to carry in the mind, as a living frequency to carry in the body. She understood that the mind can be interfered with. The mind can be confused, distorted, made to doubt. But the body, the living, breathing, electrically humming body, carrying the right physical anchor in the right location with the right understanding, the body becomes a sanctuary, a frequency generator, a walking, continuous, unstoppable declaration of what you actually are. And no archon, no administrator of limitation, no frequency distorter, no force that operates on the principle of separation and fear, no such force can sustain itself in the presence of a body that knows it is whole. That is the fullness of this teaching. That is the depth of what was buried. And that is what you are now carrying. We started with one question underneath everything. Why do some people move through life spiritually untouchable, while others keep getting pulled under no matter how hard they work? Now you know. It is not about how much you meditate, not about how many protection rituals you perform, or how much white light you visualize. Those things have value, but they don't reach the root. The root is frequency. The ones who seem untouchable, they are not lucky. They are not cosmically favored. They are coherent. They are running the Venusian frequency, the love intelligence, the signal the Archons have absolutely no language for. Mary Magdalene gave us the physical anchor for that frequency. Copper, the metal of Venus, the conductor of connection, worn at the throat, at the seat of the word, at the bridge between soul and expression, activated with breath and intention, worn daily as a living practice. Not a charm, not a decoration, a declaration. This teaching survived 2,000 years of suppression. It survived the burning of libraries, the persecution of those who carried it, the deliberate erasure of the woman who transmitted it. It survived because truth cannot be destroyed. It can only be buried, and buried things surface when the world is finally ready to receive them. I believe that moment is now. The Archons are working hard right now, harder than they have in a long time. The noise is louder, the loops are more intense, but that is not because they are winning. Interference always peaks right before the breakthrough. Always. So wear your copper. Activate it with your breath and your word. Let it rest against your throat. And when the patterns come, when the loops start and the fear hums and something tries to pull you back into forgetting, bring your awareness to the metal at your throat. Not to fight, not to shield, to remember. You are made of the one thing the Archons cannot replicate, cannot distort, and cannot touch. The divine spark, origin itself. And copper at your throat is simply the physical world's way of reminding your body what your soul has never forgotten. The metal is copper. The placement is the throat. The activation is the word. The protection is the remembering. Now I need to say something directly. YouTube has officially demonetized this channel to sanitize your mind. They are terrified of this knowledge reaching you. I refuse to water it down for advertisers. I will not stop. Instead, I am going deeper. But I cannot sustain this mission alone. I need your support to keep the esoteric Jesus alive. If this channel has cracked something open in you, click the link in the description and join me on Patreon right now. The moment you do, you will instantly unlock unfiltered esoteric member-only videos, exclusive audio podcasts, and the forbidden teachings they will never allow me to publish here. Most people will scroll past this and go back to sleep. You are not most people.